Hey guys, tonight we begin with a quiet question that has followed humanity for decades. A soft, persistent whisper from the skies that asks, what do our governments really know about the strange lights and objects that sometimes appear where they shouldn't? Tonight we will move slowly through that whisper, layer by layer, with calm curiosity and gentle care. We'll start at the beginning, trace the early encounters, and listen to the stories that shaped a web of secrecy. We'll look at documents and testimony, at rumours and recorded events, and keep one steady aim to understand, not to alarm. In the next hours, we will glide through many chapters. We'll visit the strange aerial phenomena seen by pilots in wartime. We'll sit with the story of Roswell and its ripple through the halls of government. We'll enter the rooms where early officials first met to decide what to say and what to hide. Later, we'll move into secret programs, whistleblowers, alleged recoveries, and the quieter human side of these mysteries. The people who watched the skies and wondered, and those who were tasked with answering them. I invite you to stay with me until the end. There is a calm reward in seeing the whole picture unfold, like watching constellations appear one by one on a deep, still night. Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these videos, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. Chapter 1. The First Contact. When the UFO mystery began. Imagine a late winter night over a war-torn ocean. Imagine the hush in a cockpit as two pilots peer into the infinite black, scanning for enemy planes. The sound of engines is steady. The radio clicks with routine reports. Then, against the dark, small lights appear, darting, glowing, moving in ways that ordinary machines don't. They are silent, quick, and unfathomable. The pilots exchange puzzled looks. This is where one of our earliest chapters begins. The phenomenon that pilots during World War II called Foo Fighters felt like a gentle tremor of the unknown. These were reported as glowing orbs, sometimes coloured, sometimes white, that followed aircraft or moved in groups. Often they behaved oddly, manoeuvring like living things, firing off brief flares, or simply hovering before disappearing. For those who saw them, the sensation was intimate and strange. The sky was no longer predictable. They were not loud. They did not announce themselves. They simply existed in a space the pilots had assumed was their own. On the ground, similar reports reached command centres. Mechanics, radar operators, and radar screens began to register objects that did not match any known plane. In the fog of war, commanders worried. Anomalous lights could be new enemy weapons or new aircraft or something else entirely. These sightings planted a seed of concern. If pilots could not recognize what was above them, then perhaps more was at stake than loose lights on a night sky. The movement from wartime curiosity to a domestic crisis in the United States found a dramatic point of contact in the summer of 1947. In the New Mexico desert, a rancher found strange debris on his land. Reports spread. The press reached for the story. The tale that came to be known as Roswell would become a quiet, persistent drumbeat in the public imagination. Roswell began with a short press release, oddly worded, that hinted at a flying disc. Soon after, the language shifted. The military clarified the material was from a weather balloon. But the contradiction between initial reports and later explanations left room for other stories to grow. For many, Roswell felt like an opening, a place where evidence had been found, and where questions about alien craft and secret recoveries took root. For officials, the episode posed an organizational problem: how to manage information so that public panic did not unfold while also protecting national security. In response to incidents like Roswell, small urgent meetings began to take place within government. They were quiet, closed-door conversations in basement offices, in secure rooms, among people who had access to both intelligence and the power to act. These were not theatrical scenes of secret handshakes. They were practical gatherings of those who needed to know: military officers, intelligence analysts, and specialist scientists. They discussed what the sightings might mean, how to test recovered materials if any existed, and how to explain, or not explain, the findings to the public. One of the central threads in this early tapestry is the question of the CIA's role. Created in 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency was designed to gather and analyze information that pertained to national security. When reports of inexplicable aerial phenomena began to accumulate, the CIA's analytical mission naturally drew it into the picture. Its mandate was to understand threats and to sift through intelligence for patterns. When strange reports crossed into the domain of national security, possible foreign technology, unknown aerial behavior, or unexplained materials, the CIA had both the skill set and the authority to study them. But involvement did not always look like direct admission. Often, the agency's role was more subtle, analyzing reports, producing internal memos, advising other branches of government on the likelihood that an unknown object was an enemy craft, a natural phenomenon, or something else. The CIA's work was often methodical and cautious, grounded in assessment rather than celebrity. For the public, this quiet analysis could feel like silence. For analysts, it was the steady work of reduction, sorting the plausible from the improbable. Yet the early years were also a time of human stories. Pilots who had seen the Foo Fighters would later describe the feeling of brief fellowship with the unknown, the soft thrill of witnessing something that did not belong to any manual. Ranchers near Roswell described odd debris and the hush that followed heavy government vehicles sweeping through the area. Scientists and officers in conference rooms debated whether anomalous radar blips indicated new foreign technology. As this chapter draws to a close, consider the scene like a slow, cool dawn. The sky's changing, questions are being written on the horizon. No single thread explains everything, but together they form a gentle pattern. Wartime eyewitnesses, an enigmatic desert crash, and a government newly formed and quietly beginning to study the unexplainable. There is no sudden reveal here, only a steady assembling of facts and impressions, each one softening into the next like morning mist over a plain. If you are still with me, keep this thought. The earliest contacts were not cinematic meetings between generals and aliens. They were a collection of small human moments. Pilots squinting against the dark, officials jotting notes in dim rooms, a rancher picking through bent metal. Those small moments planted the seeds of decades of secrecy, debate, and curiosity. Chapter 2: The Birth of Secrecy. How the government covered it up. There is a peculiar hush that follows certain discoveries. Imagine the desert air cooling as night arrives, the wind carrying only a faint, dry whisper, while heavy vehicles move slowly across a plain. Men and women in uniform step softly, lifting strange fragments into wooden crates, stamping their boots in the dust. They fold tarps with careful hands and load boxes into trucks under searchlights that cut the darkness with pale blades. They speak in low voices because each word could ripple into something larger. This quiet, practical choreography is the beginning of how secrecy becomes habit. After incidents like those in the late 1940s, the government made choices that would shape decades. One of the first and most consequential choices was to classify suspected UFO incidents as matters of national security. On paper, classification serves a clear purpose: to protect information that could threaten lives, reveal sources, or warn an adversary. In practice, classification also becomes a tool that shapes what the public sees and what it does not. When a report was judged to have potential military significance, for example suggesting foreign technology or unknown materials, the language of protection moved quickly from policy to practice. Classifying an event creates a structure. There are forms to fill, stamps to make, folders to seal. A report that might once have been a local curiosity moves up a chain, to base commanders, to service intelligence officers, and sometimes into the hands of newly formed agencies whose job is to assess threats. With this chain came rules: who needed to know, who could access the evidence, and who would speak publicly, if anyone at all. In a post-war world shaped by emerging superpowers, the imperative to control potentially sensitive information was particularly strong. Fear of a technological surprise, of an adversary unveiling a device that outmatched existing defenses, made secrecy feel prudent. Alongside formal classification, another quieter apparatus grew: containment strategies. If something could not be accepted into the public record, it could still be contained. This meant cordoning off crash sites, relocating debris to secure facilities, and limiting access to labs where materials might be studied. It meant asking local witnesses to remain quiet, sometimes through polite requests, and sometimes through official orders. It meant creating a web of people sworn to silence. Military personnel, scientists with security clearances, and contractors bound by legal agreements. Each person involved added a new link in the chain of secrecy. Out of these practices came stories of specialized groups and programs. One of the most persistent names whispered in corridors and in late-night conversations is Majestic 12, often shortened to MJ12. It is said, in those narratives, to be an inner committee assembled to handle the most sensitive of these matters. Whether exactly as the stories describe or in some other, less sensational form, the idea itself speaks to how bureaucracy and secrecy weave together. A small, tight circle of officials and experts handling extraordinary information away from public view. To those inside such circles, secrecy can feel like a heavy responsibility. To those outside, it becomes fertile ground for speculation. Secret investigations and public reassurance developed side by side, and sometimes in deliberate opposition. On one level, governments spoke to their citizens in the language of calm, reassurances that there was no danger, that the skies were safe, that routine testing explained anomalies. On another level, investigators quietly pursued leads, tested fragments in laboratories, and wrote reports that never saw the light of day. This dual approach arose from a political judgment that calm public messaging protected social order and national morale, while private investigation preserved the ability to act without tipping off potential adversaries. Misinformation, whether intentional or accidental, became part of the landscape. There were practical reasons for this. A cover story might be chosen because it was the most plausible immediate explanation, or because it helped redirect attention away from sensitive installations. Weather balloons, experimental aircraft, and atmospheric phenomena became go-to explanations not only because they were often plausible, but because they were useful. Over time, the habit of offering comfortable, official explanations hardened into a pattern. That pattern sometimes looked like deliberate obfuscation to those who pieced together inconsistent statements. To those inside, it often felt like damage control in a tense geopolitical era. But secrecy also has human consequences. Imagine being a technician who's been ordered to work on something without being told why. You sort metal that behaves oddly, you log measurements into a ledger, and you are told the notes are for your eyes only. You feel the tug of curiosity, and at the same time the weight of an obligation you cannot share. This tension, curiosity restrained by duty, is part of the human story behind sealed files and hidden hangars. It is also why leaks, rumours and whistleblowers eventually appear. Long-held silence meets human restlessness, and someone reaches for the light. The policy of secrecy did more than protect potential technology. It shaped public perception. When official statements changed, or when initial reports were reworded, people noticed the mismatch. Small inconsistencies in language became large questions in public minds. Newspapers that once published dramatic headlines found themselves met with official denials. Citizens who searched for answers encountered a mix of reassurances and silence. The result was a cultural schism, a part of the public that accepted official narratives, and another part that saw the gaps and filled them with alternative stories. That gap is where folklore grows, where late-night tales and conspiracy theories become the architecture of a different kind of truth. Consider a quiet vignette. A small-town sheriff, sitting at his kitchen table late at night, receives a call to a nearby field. He drives out with 2 deputies, finds a perimeter of military trucks and men in dark uniforms, and is told firmly, but politely, that the area is off-limits. The sheriff stands, watching the men move crates into a covered truck. He's handed a terse statement about a national security operation and asked to keep this within official channels. Later, he reads a short press release calling the event a harmless test balloon. He shrugs. He keeps the silence because there is little else he can do. Stories like these are small, human seams in the larger fabric of secrecy. Secrecy is not only about hiding, it is about control. It controls knowledge, narrative, and sometimes power. It can protect, but it can also erode trust when explanations do not align with people's experiences. Yet secrecy also has a logic. In an era when nations feared surprise attacks and technological surprises, not every piece of information could be shared without consequence. As this chapter softens into its close, picture the same desert under a calmer sky. The crates have been driven away. The searchlights have been turned off. A polite press release circulates, offering a simple explanation for a complex event. Inside secure rooms, reports are filed and labelled confidential somewhere. A small committee debates how to proceed. In the public square, people speculate. Some take the official word and sleep a little easier. Others keep watch, eyes on the horizon. The birth of secrecy was not a single act. It was a series of choices, precautions and practices that grew out of real anxieties and real responsibilities. It created systems that could protect a nation and at the same time left behind questions that fevered in the dark. That tension between caution and curiosity would shape the next chapters of this story. The rise of formal investigations, the machinery of denial, and the long, slow unravelling that would bring both leaks and revelations into the light. Chapter 3. Project Blue Book, the official denial machine. There is a particular hush that comes with bureaucracy. The soft rustle of paper, the measured tick of a typewriter or keyboard, the quiet footsteps along a corridor lined with locked doors. Project Blue Book began in that measured silence, not as a headline-grabbing drama, but as an organised attempt to gather, catalogue and explain. Picture a small office with stacks of reports, photographs tacked to corkboards, and officers tracing lines between radar blips and witness statements. The mission was written in neutral language. Investigate reports of unidentified flying objects, determine if they threatened national security, and, if possible, explain them away. At first glance, Blue Book seemed like a sensible, practical response. If people were reporting strange lights and objects, the Air Force reasoned, those reports should be investigated. Pilots, radar technicians, police officers, and civilians supplied the narratives. Scientists and military analysts supplied the methodology. Cases were opened, investigators interviewed witnesses, and files were kept. On paper, the process was thorough. The language used was clinical and calm, a tone meant to reassure. But beneath that tone lay complicated currents. Project Blue Book inherited earlier efforts and became the most visible public face of the government's response to UFO reports for many years. It published summaries, issued periodic reports, and attempted to place anomalies into known categories: misidentified planets, weather balloons, aircraft, astronomical phenomena, or hoaxes. For many citizens, Blue Book represented an official answer, a promise that experts were looking into the matter. For others, it felt like a curtain, an official story that did not always match what witnesses had experienced. The CIA's role in relation to Blue Book was quieter, though significant. While the Air Force handled the operational side, collecting reports and doing initial analysis, the CIA often worked in parallel, interpreting the intelligence implications of those same reports. The agency's analysts were concerned not only with whether an object was mysterious, but with what it might mean. Was it foreign technology? Could it indicate a capability that adversaries wanted to conceal? Could it be a new class of weapon that might shift the balance of power? These were the questions that drove a different kind of investigation, one rooted in threat assessment rather than public explanation. As decades passed and more files accumulated, a pattern emerged. Many cases were explained satisfactorily: a bright planet mistaken for a hovering light, a weather balloon misidentified as a structured craft. But other cases resisted tidy explanations. Some involved trained observers, airline pilots, military pilots, radar operators, reporting phenomena that did not comport with known flight dynamics. Some involved physical traces on the ground, odd radiation readings, or materials that perplexed technicians. These unresolved cases gathered their own gravity. They were the ones that eventually became the source material for books, late-night programs, and persistent skepticism about the official narrative. One of the most striking numbers that circulated in later reflections was a tally of hundreds of cases that remained unexplained even after an initial review. In public conversation, the idea of 701 unexplained cases became shorthand for a deeper question. If trained analysts could not account for these incidents, what did that imply? For those who wanted answers, the unresolved files were proof that something deeper lingered. For officials, the unresolved cases were often ambiguous: incomplete data, flawed witness recollections, or simply reports that lacked the rigorous evidence needed for conclusive analysis. The process of classifying and closing cases sometimes relied on the absence of evidence as much as the presence of it. An investigator might note gently and carefully the limitations of a report: cloudy conditions, inconsistent witness statements, or faulty instruments. In the quiet of the files, such practicalities felt reasonable, but to witnesses who felt certain of what they had seen, the official explanations could feel dismissive. This gap between analytical caution and emotional certainty widened into public distrust. A person who had watched a bright, structured object hover near a field and later read a dry report that called it a misidentified star might rightly ask whether their experience was being honoured. There were also institutional incentives at play. Maintaining public calm during tense geopolitical times was a priority. A sudden admission of unknown, potentially advanced aerial phenomena could cause anxiety, inspire rumors, or even spark hysteria. The tone of official reports often reflected a desire to avoid fueling sensationalism. Blue Book's output therefore walked a tightrope. Be thorough enough to satisfy critics that investigations were real, but be careful enough in public language to avoid panic or misinterpretation. These twin aims shaped not only what was written, but how it was received. For some people who worked within the system, the tension became personal. Imagine an earnest analyst late at night reading through a stack of witness interviews. She notes correlations between reports, odd physical traces that recur, and patterns of behavior in certain objects. She raises questions at a meeting and is reminded of protocols. Check the equipment, verify the reports, err on the side of conventional explanation. The analyst files her notes and keeps watching. Her curiosity persists, but within the structure of the institution she serves. As time moved on, public patience with official narratives began to shift. Pop culture added layers of imagery, films and books that dramatized alien encounters, late-night talk shows that featured animated debates, and reporters who chased leads into the archives. The story of Project Blue Book itself became a cultural motif, an emblem of official efforts to catalogue the unknown, and, to some, to obscure it. The files that Blue Book produced were both a resource and a puzzle, a mixture of clear explanations, ambiguous cases, and at times puzzling omissions. In the soft, reflective way this documentary moves, it is important to consider both sides of that ledger. Project Blue Book was not simply an effort to deny. It was an institutional response to a complex social and security problem. It gathered data, attempted to apply scientific methods, and produced a public record. Yet its methods and its public posture also contributed to skepticism and to a perception that something was being concealed. This dual reality, methodical investigation on one hand and eroding public trust on the other, set the stage for a later unravelling where leaks, whistleblowers, and renewed official interest would change the conversation. Before we move on, imagine a final scene for this chapter. The Blue Book office at dusk, a desk lamp illuminating a stack of reports, a corkboard with pinned photographs and typed notes. A young investigator stands, rubs tired eyes, and looks out a window at a sky slowly dimming into stars. He files a completed report into a folder labelled Closed. In the same night, another call comes in from a small airport. A pilot has seen something unusual. The investigator reaches for the phone. The work continues, patient and steady, in the small human ways that shape history. Chapter 4: The Cold War and the Alien Cover-Up. Imagine a frozen morning at an airbase miles from the nearest town. Frost coats the wings of test planes. Men in leather jackets move with practiced efficiency. Radios hum with static and purpose. The world beyond that runway is a tightrope of rival powers, each watching the other with a kind of fierce, patient vigilance. In that atmosphere, anything strange in the sky could be read as a threat, and the instinct to hide new capabilities was not paranoia so much as survival. The Cold War transformed how governments interpreted unexplained aerial phenomena. At its core, the era was defined by a fear of surprise, the possibility that an enemy might develop a capability so advanced it could undo years of preparation. This fear shaped intelligence priorities and military planning. A bright light in the sky might be a natural curiosity, but it might also be the first glimpse of a new enemy weapon. That possibility made every unexplained sighting into a candidate for intense scrutiny. At the same time, the Cold War birthed a parallel reality. Secret aircraft and clandestine programs that moved through the skies without public acknowledgement. Engineers at remote bases tinkered and tested, building experimental planes that pushed the boundaries of speed, altitude, and stealth. Some of these projects were locked down behind layers of compartmentalized secrecy. Their flights were watched through the cold lens of radar screens and sometimes misinterpreted as something otherworldly. Consider a small but steady stream of stories. A radar operator tracking a high-altitude blip that climbs and then disappears. A pilot spotting a streamlined object moving faster than known craft. A farmer seeing a flash of reflective metal slipping above the tree line. For a time, these accounts could be puzzling. Later, when details of secret reconnaissance aircraft were declassified, some of those strange reports settled into new context. High-altitude surveillance planes, experimental drones, and rocket-assisted test vehicles can explain many previously perplexing sightings. In this way, the boundary between human invention and the unexplained blurred. Remember the engineers who worked on spy planes? They were focused on pushing the limits, higher ceilings, greater speeds, better cameras. To protect those advances, secrecy was essential. Test flights were conducted at night or over remote areas. Tracking signatures were deliberately altered. Sometimes decoy profiles were used to hide real capabilities. From a distance, these measures created the impression of objects that behaved oddly, because the planes themselves were designed to behave in ways unfamiliar to air traffic controllers and ground observers. Radar anomalies played a prominent role in Cold War confusion. Radar is a complicated instrument. It can detect birds, weather, atmospheric layers, and foreign aircraft in ways a human eye cannot. Conditions such as temperature inversions can bend radar waves and create phantom echoes. When combined with the presence of unfamiliar aircraft, these anomalies could produce a tableau that challenged even experienced analysts. A radar screen might show a contact that moves in impossible ways, and the human mind, trained to expect conventional motion, searched for explanation. In tense times, the mind sometimes favors the worst-case scenario. Intelligence agencies also learned to use the UFO phenomenon in strategic ways. When a nation wanted to conceal a new technology, muddying the public narrative could be useful. A plausible story about mysterious lights or balloon tests could deflect attention away from a secret program. Disinformation, or at times carefully framed ambiguity, became a tactical tool. Plant a misleading explanation, and the public gaze moves away while engineers refine their design in the dark. At times, the management of public perception looked less like deceit and more like an instrument of national strategy. The role of foreign powers added another layer. If one country feared that sightings were the work of an adversary, intelligence services had to consider new possibilities. Was the Soviet Union testing something similar, or were they the curious observers? The reciprocal shadow play of the two superpowers meant that unexplained phenomena could be read through many lenses. A bright object over the Arctic might be a US test plane, a Soviet reconnaissance vehicle, or a natural formation amplified by atmospheric conditions. The ambiguity multiplied the number of questions and minimized the comfort of certainty. In the midst of this strategic maze, ordinary people continued to see extraordinary things. Pilots, often the most credible witnesses, sometimes described objects that outpaced known aircraft, made sudden stops, or turned with near impossible precision. Yet when those reports reached military channels, they were filtered through layers of analysis that emphasized caution. If a report lacked corroborating radar or photographic evidence, it might be catalogued and filed away. In other cases, reports were routed to specific programs to see whether an explanation could be found in classified work. There are quiet human stories that illustrate how closely these worlds intertwined. Picture a small radar station near a coastal inlet. One night, an operator watches a bright signature glide along a corridor, change course sharply, and vanish over the water. He radios the regional command. The response is curt, a request for more data, and then a prompt to stand down. Weeks later, the operator learns his radar logs will be sealed. He is reassigned. He never hears a public explanation. In the silence that follows, he rejoins the small private club of those who sense that more is known than told. Not every UFO of the Cold War was human. Some were simple misperceptions, Venus blazing low in the evening sky, or a meteor streaking across a clear night. Others were man-made but mundane, like weather balloons or civilian aircraft. Still, enough remained that, in the absence of an open conversation, speculation grew. The more official voices denied or deflected, the more stories flourished in the margins. Popular culture responded with films and novels that wove the anxieties and possibilities of the era into dramatic narratives, where secret projects and alien intelligence became interchangeable anxieties. As we move gently through this chapter, it is useful to remember that the Cold War created both the conditions for extraordinary technological progress and a culture of concealment. Advances in propulsion, material science, and aerodynamics were made in laboratories and on test ranges. Those advances sometimes produced objects that, to eyes and radars tuned to expect older designs, looked uncanny. The secrecy that protected those advances also protected the narrative around them. The public saw fragments, the government retained the whole picture. The question that lingers, soft and patient, is this: were some UFOs man-made after all? The answer is both simple and layered. Many puzzling sightings, when later contextualized, fit into the story of classified aircraft and experimental tests. A number of reports that once seemed inexplicable are now understood to be echoes of secret programs. Yet other cases stubbornly resist such tidy placement. There remain reports with credible witnesses and multiple sensors that do not easily align with known human technology. These enduring anomalies continue to trouble analysts and inspire new generations of investigators. As this chapter draws to a close, envision a late evening at a test range. A prototype plane rests under canvas. Its engineers sip coffee, exhausted and elated in equal measure. They have pushed the envelope and paid for that push with a vow of silence. Farther away, a farmer looks up and wonders about a light that moved like a living thing. Both scenes are connected by a single thread. Human curiosity meeting the edges of the unknown. The Cold War sharpened that intersection, making the skies a theatre of both invention and ambiguity. Chapter 5. Area 51, the epicenter of alien secrets. Picture a wide, quiet salt flat that shimmers under a late afternoon sun. The air is thin and dry, and the horizon seems to breathe in long, slow waves. In the distance, a cluster of low buildings and hangars rests like a secret folded into the landscape. Guards walk a slow perimeter. Lights hum at night. The whole place feels designed to keep its own rhythms private. That place, known to many as Area 51, grew into a symbol, a pinpoint on the map that came to hold 1,000 private questions. Area 51 did not become legendary overnight. Its visible life began with practical needs. The remote landscape, the long empty runways, and the natural secrecy of the desert made it an ideal spot to test experimental aircraft. Engineers and pilots needed a wide, empty sky and a field where mistakes, if they happened, would not interrupt daily life. The base at Groom Lake offered that. Over time, projects that once required the hush of a few rooms expanded into entire programs that needed silence by design. When people speak of Area 51, they often imagine hangars full of sleek alien craft and rows of scientists hunched over otherworldly consoles. Some stories go further, telling of darkened vaults, sealed morgues, and reverse engineering labs where unknown materials were studied. Many of the most dramatic elements of those stories sit in the realm of allegation and witness testimony. Individuals have come forward over the years with detailed recollections of places called S4 and with claims of craft that behaved unlike anything built on Earth. These accounts are at once intoxicating and elusive, full of specific detail but often lacking the corroboration required by formal inquiry. One of the most widely told stories involves a man who described working near a secret facility south of Area 51, a place he called S4, where he said craft were stored beneath the desert surface and studied. He described unusual alloys, curved panels with seams that resisted familiar tools, and propulsion concepts that read like the pages of science fiction. Whether his accounts were literal fact, misinterpreted memory, or a mixture of both is something that scholars and skeptics continue to debate. But the power of such stories is not only in their specifics, it is in how they give shape to a broader human longing, to believe that something extraordinary might be within reach of our hands. The notion of reverse engineering is central to the mythos of Area 51. Reverse engineering implies that a piece of technology, once obtained, can be disassembled, read, and then reassembled into something human minds can reproduce. It suggests a laboratory bustling with machinists, engineers, and physicists peering through microscopes and making careful, tentative notes. Within such a mental image, the slow, methodical work of discovery becomes almost devotional, a patient attempt to coax meaning from metal and mystery. For many, that is the image they carry forward, careful hands trying to translate an alien alphabet into human equations. Yet it is also important to fold in the quieter, more mundane reality of what such a place would require. If a facility houses experiments of any advanced sort, it needs technicians, secure communications, maintenance crews, electricians, and people who handle paperwork. It needs a culture of compartmentalization, people allowed to know only the slice of information necessary for their job. Compartmentalization is practical and intentional. It reduces accidental leaks and keeps sensitive work from being compromised. But it also creates odd human dynamics. People working on adjacent projects can spend careers in the same small town and never exchange more than a few sentences about the work that consumes them. That human architecture, trust coupled with strict silence, is a key reason why Area 51 became fertile ground for rumour. One of the most compelling parts of the Area 51 narrative is the idea that even presidents and high officials were sometimes denied full access. It is easy to imagine a dramatic scene, a head of state arriving on a tarmac, being met with a curt briefing, and then being ushered away from certain hangars. The reality is usually less cinematic but no less telling. In an era of need-to-know security culture, access is often filtered through layers of classification. Even individuals at the highest levels of political leadership may not be briefed on every compartmented project, simply because those in charge of the program are required to disclose sensitive methods only to those who will directly support them. This is not necessarily sinister in intent. Sometimes it is bureaucracy and legal requirement, an institutional defense against leaks and espionage. Other times it feeds suspicion. If a leader is told that certain rooms are off limits, people naturally imagine what might be behind those locked doors. Area 51 has also been a stage of a human drama and small ethical questions. Consider the maintenance worker who signs an oath and spends years replacing filters in a hangar without ever being told the name of the aircraft beneath the tarp. Consider the pilot who tests a prototype at night and returns home to a family dinner, unable to describe the shimmering silhouette in the sky. These are ordinary human lives threaded into extraordinary work. The emotional texture of these experiences is soft and complicated. Pride mixed with secrecy, curiosity mixed with resignation. Public imagination did what secrecy almost always does. It supplied detail where official channels were silent. When people see a glowing sky and then read a terse statement from authorities, the gap becomes an invitation. Writers, filmmakers, and storytellers took the raw materials of rumour and secrecy and fashioned narratives that captured the public's appetite. That popular culture fed back into belief, and belief fed back into reporting. The loop created its own ecosystem. People visited the desert seeking signs. Authors wrote expositions. Documentary filmmakers sought interviews. Area 51 in that way became not only a site but a symbol, a physical place, and a story people could visit in their minds. At the same time, not every secret is about aliens. Area 51 and places like it were demonstrably involved in very earthly innovations. Reconnaissance aircraft, stealth technologies, and experimental propulsion concepts were developed under wraps. Some of the aura of alien mystery likely hung on the silhouettes of these unfamiliar machines. A plane that looks nothing like a conventional jet tested only under blackout conditions will appear to an outside observer as if it belongs to another world. Over time, the line between human-made wonder and alleged extraterrestrial artifact blurred for many observers. There is also a quiet, ethical dimension to this discussion. If a government holds knowledge about something potentially transformative, how should it balance public curiosity with national security? If a technology could shift power balances or cause panic, do those in authority bear the responsibility to manage disclosure carefully? Or does secrecy, no matter the intent, become its own hazard when it breeds mistrust and rumour? These are not easy answers. They are slow questions to be considered with the same careful attention given to a fragile artifact in a laboratory. As night falls over Groom Lake in our imagined scene, picture the hangars casting long, black silhouettes on the salt. A small crew finishes its shift, exchanging cordial nods and then vanishing into the dark. A maintenance truck rumbles away, its headlights melting into the black like two small obedient stars. Somewhere in a secure room, a logbook is updated. Elsewhere, a rumour is born at a kitchen table and begins to circulate. The contrast between the quiet labour and the loud myth is part of the human story here. People who work in service of the unknown, and a public that fills the silence with narrative. In the end, Area 51 is both a place and a mirror. It mirrors our hunger for answers and our tendency to fill empty spaces with meaning. It represents the technical edge of human ingenuity and the social consequences of hiding that edge from public view. Whether anything truly non-human has ever rested within its hangars is a question that invites careful scrutiny and patient listening. What we can say with quiet certainty is that the base-shaped modern myth in a way few places have. It taught generations to look at the sky and wonder, and that wonder, gentle, persistent, human, is at the heart of why these stories endure. Chapter 6. Reverse Engineering. Technology, not of this earth. Imagine a quiet laboratory late at night. The lights are dimmed to protect sensitive instruments. A faint hum comes from cooling systems, and the smell of warm metal and solvent hangs lightly in the air. At a bench, a pair of gloved hands lift a thin, curved shard of material, its surface reflecting the soft light like a small, indifferent moon. The person holding it feels both wonder and the steady, practical weight of analysis. What is this made of? How does it hold its shape? How might a human mind translate this object into an understandable machine? Reverse engineering starts with questions that are almost childlike in their simplicity. Take it apart, look closely, and try to read the language written in the parting lines and the way components meet. Engineers trained in aeronautics and materials science learned to read those signs. Grain patterns in metals, weld traces, fastener types, the geometry of a joint. From such clues they infer manufacturing techniques, tolerances, and design intentions. When the object under scrutiny is unfamiliar, these questions feel like whispers into a foreign tongue. The more unusual the artifact, the more creative the interpretation must be. Accounts of reverse engineering often begin with fragments, pieces of skin, squares of metal, or oddly behaving components found among wreckage. In stories that circulate among investigators and in public law, technicians take such fragments to labs where microscopes reveal crystalline structures and chemical assays measure isotopes. Sometimes the results are puzzling. Alloys with combinations of elements that seem unusual for the period, or microstructures that hint at thermal treatments outside known manufacturing practices. At other times, tests show familiar materials assembled in unfamiliar ways. Both outcomes present challenges. Is this something completely new, or is this advanced engineering hidden inside a guise we do not immediately recognize? One of the most patient acts of reverse engineering is the slow mapping of function to form. A rounded cavity might suggest a propulsion chamber. Layered composites might hint at heat resistance. Odd radio emissions could indicate unconventional control systems. But mapping form to function is an act of inference. It requires models, prototypes, and repeated testing. Imagine a team of engineers making careful notes, building scaled models, and subjecting them to wind tunnels and vibration tests. They listen to how the material sings under stress. They measure how it bends and returns. They keep samples in controlled environments and log every small reaction. This methodical work is scientific and repetitive, the kind of slow craft that turns mystery into usable knowledge. Yet there are many obstacles. One is simply the limits of available data. A tiny shard tells a piece of the story, but not the whole narrative. Without intact systems, engineers must hypothesize how parts interacted. They must invent ways to test functions that are not obvious. They may design experiments to replicate observable behavior, sometimes using leaps of imagination grounded in scientific practice. Another obstacle is secrecy and access. If materials are held tightly within a compartmentalized program, only a narrow circle of specialists can study them. That can slow progress and encourage rumor. There is also the problem of false leads. Human technology sometimes follows convergent paths. Two engineers working independently on similar problems may produce similar-looking solutions without any contact. A material that looks exotic may in fact be an advanced but terrestrial alloy developed quietly in a corporate lab. Conversely, entirely novel phenomena might be explained by known physics once the right measurement is made. The human mind loves elegant patterns, and there is a risk of shaping results to fit an attractive story. Responsible scientists therefore insist on repeatability and peer review, but in classified environments, peer review is limited by necessity. The tension between scientific rigor and secrecy is a quiet, persistent friction. When reverse engineering enters the realm of propulsion, the questions widen. Conventional jet engines and rockets follow familiar rules: intake, compression, combustion, exhaust, or reaction mass ejection. But eyewitness accounts and some insider claims describe craft that maneuver with sudden stops, instantaneous accelerations, or the ability to hover without obvious means of lift. To explain such motion within human physics, engineers imagine a range of possibilities: new forms of reactionless drives, extreme use of electromagnetic fields, or manipulation of the local inertial frame. These are not easily realized with existing engineering. They would require either previously unknown physics or incredible mastery of materials and energy control. Some scientists have speculated about concepts like magnetohydrodynamic propulsion. where ionized gases interact with magnetic fields to produce thrust, or about plasma-based systems that reduce drag and enable unusual maneuverability. Others have suggested more speculative frameworks, ideas that touch on fields like quantum field effects or advanced manipulation of gravitational coupling. These conversations are often tentative and cautious. Many scientists emphasize how far we are from robust, reproducible demonstrations of such effects in controlled experiments. In a calm tone, it's important to separate imaginative possibilities from verified engineering breakthroughs. Another intriguing avenue is materials science. Imagine a metal that, when flexed, returns to a precise shape without deformation, or a composite that tolerates extreme heat without oxidizing. A lab studying such properties would look for layered microstructures, non-equilibrium alloys, or coatings that interact with electromagnetic waves in special ways. They would examine grain boundaries, phase transitions, and potential nanoscale architectures. Often, the breakthroughs in modern materials come from manipulating matter at tiny scales, arranging atoms and interfaces precisely so that macroscopic properties emerge. Achieving such control requires advanced manufacturing techniques, vacuum deposition, precision forging, and clean room assembly. If a recovered fragment showed signs of manufacturing at those scales, it would be a clue of technological maturity. Whistleblower accounts and former technicians occasionally describe laboratories where such work supposedly occurred. They speak of rooms humming with equipment, of scientists poring over samples, and of memos debating the meaning of odd findings. For many listeners, these accounts add texture and human faces to the abstract idea of reverse engineering. For skeptics, these stories need corroboration. For researchers, they point to lines of inquiry. Repeated claims about strange alloys or unusual propulsion signatures deserve careful measurement, and, where possible, independent analysis. Even when reverse engineering yields progress, the path from prototype to practical application is long. Engineers must scale what works in small tests to full-size systems. They must solve problems of power supply, control systems, manufacturing repeatability, and reliability. A lab might demonstrate a tiny thrust in a vacuum chamber, but powering a full-scale vehicle requires sustained energy at rates far beyond present-day portable sources. That energy challenge is a bottleneck in many speculative propulsion concepts. It pushes inventors to think about new ways to harvest, store, and direct energy, a pursuit that connects physics, chemistry, and materials science. There are ethical and strategic questions embedded in the practice of reverse engineering too. If a government believes it has access to technology that could dramatically change strategic balances, decisions about control, proliferation, and disclosure are hard to make. Is it better to keep a powerful technology guarded until safe and reliable methods for its use are found? Or does holding it close risk concentrating power and eroding trust? Policymakers face choices that are as much about social stability as they are about scientific prudence. A steady, humane approach considers both the potential benefits and the responsibilities of stewardship. For those who study these matters in quiet rooms, there is a rhythm to the work: patience, repetition, and humility. Engineers who have spent careers in reverse engineering often speak of small victories, a test that confirms a model, a successful replication of a material process, a week when a simulation finally matches observed behavior. They also speak of long stretches where progress is measured in incremental learning rather than sudden breakthroughs. The narrative of a single dramatic leap from fragment to functioning alien craft is a satisfying story, but reality more often resembles a slow coaling of knowledge, where many small pieces eventually add up to usable understanding. As this chapter winds down, Picture that laboratory once more. The fragment rests in a magnetic holder. A camera takes slow, careful images. A scientist notes the microstructure in a journal, sketches a diagram, and arranges another test for the morning. Outside, the desert night is quiet and vast, a deep backdrop to the small, luminous work inside. The possibility that some recovered items might contain unfamiliar engineering is a gentle invitation to explore, but with it comes the steady call for careful measurement, open reporting where possible, and humility in the face of unknowns. If any revelation occurs from such work, it is likely to be incremental. A better alloy here, a new composite there, an improved sensor that opens a vista of measurement. Reverse engineering, framed in this soft, patient way, becomes less a miracle and more a craft, a sustained human effort to translate the unfamiliar into language we can use. It's a work that blends curiosity, caution, and competence, and it asks us to balance wonder with the discipline of science. Chapter 7: Alien Bodies and Autopsies, Fact or Fabrication. There is a different kind of hush when the matter being moved is no longer metal but flesh. Imagine a long windowless room lit by cool, clinical lamps. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and metal. A table sits in the middle, its surface gleaming under light. People move in practice steps, their faces measured, their voices low, because here the work is both technical and intimate. When stories turn from lights in the sky to bodies on a slab, the emotional temperature changes. We leave the abstract and step into the most human territory of all: life, death, and the questions we ask about both. The most famous image in this part of the story is not a photograph of a craft, but a film. A grainy staged sequence that shows what appears to be a post-mortem examination of a small grey figure. The footage, when it first surfaced in popular culture, arrested people because it translated rumour into a visual language that everyone could understand. A film makes the uncanny immediate. For those who believed, it was confirmation. For skeptics, it was a provocation to look closer. The existence of such a film crystallized debates and created a theatre of proof and counterproof that would last for years. Beyond dramatic images, there are many other accounts, testimonies from military personnel, local civilians, even medical staff, claiming to have seen unusual remains after crashes. In some versions, the bodies are described as humanoid, but with proportions that differ from ours: larger eyes, thin limbs, or heads shaped in unfamiliar curves. In other accounts, descriptions are more ambiguous, fragments of tissue that, under close inspection, show unusual cellular patterns or unexpected biochemistry. The variety in these stories is itself telling. It suggests either a range of different phenomena or perhaps the ways memory and culture shape recollection. To understand such claims calmly, we must ask a series of careful questions. First, what is the quality of the evidence? Eyewitness testimony is powerful and personal, but human memory is malleable. Under stress or excitement, details can shift. Time also changes recall. What seemed certain in the moment can blur with later discussions and influences. Second, what physical evidence exists? Reliable chains of custody, verifiable lab reports and independent analyses are the bedrock of credible claims. If tissue samples were examined, who did the testing? Were controls used? Can results be reproduced by independent labs? These are not hair-splitting queries. They are the fundamental standards that separate anecdote from science. The idea of secret morgues and military labs studying non-human life taps into deep anxieties and imaginations. Picture a subterranean room where technicians in masks work over trays, where door codes and clearance levels keep the curious out. The reality of military medical facilities is often more prosaic. They exist to handle classified cases, human or otherwise, and their operations are regimented by law, ethics, and protocol. If something truly anomalous had been recovered, it would create a cascade of practical questions. How to preserve samples, who has the authority to order tests, what legal frameworks apply, and what obligations exist to disclose findings to oversight bodies. Bureaucracy, in that sense, is part of the story as much as the bodies themselves. There are also plausible earthly explanations that can help us account for many claims. Misidentified human or animal remains are one such explanation. In the aftermath of a crash, burned or distorted corpses can look unlike their original form. Small animals, once altered by fire or mechanical trauma, can be misperceived. In environments of high stress and secrecy, those misperceptions can harden into confident claims. Then there are hoaxes and fabrications, sometimes elaborate, built to shock or to profit. The social dynamics that reward sensational stories create incentives for such fabrications, and once a hoax is in the culture, it can be difficult to dislodge. That said, the persistence of stories over decades, repeated by people across different regions and backgrounds, raises a different kind of curiosity. Why do such narratives continue to be told, even when some high-profile examples are exposed as fabrications? One answer lies in human psychology. People experience anomalous events and seek patterns that make sense with the rest of what they know. If an unusual night sky is followed by a rumor of a crash, and that rumor is reinforced by someone claiming to have seen something removed under cover of darkness, a small kernel of mystery can grow into a durable story. Social reinforcement, the circulation of narratives, and selective memory all conspire to maintain these claims over long spans of time. We should also consider the role of confirmation and the cultural scaffolding around these stories. Once a community accepts that a certain place or institution is likely to house secrets, new claims are filtered through that expectation. A technician who once thought nothing of moving odd crates might later interpret those crates as containing non-human remains if the cultural context primes him to expect that possibility. This is not to dismiss individual testimony as dishonest. Rather, it is to recognize the complex interplay between perception, memory, and cultural narrative. For those who investigate scientifically, there is a clear path forward: rigorous analysis, transparent methodology, and independent verification. A preserved tissue sample, tested in multiple accredited labs with agreed protocols and controls, can yield biochemistry, DNA sequences, and cellular architecture that either place it within known life forms or point towards something unusual. If DNA analysis returns sequences that match known taxa, that clarifies the case. If sequences diverge significantly from known databases, that would be an extraordinary finding requiring extraordinary corroboration. The norms of science are designed for exactly these moments, where skepticism and curiosity intersect in measurable ways. Another dimension to the discussion is the ethical one. If non-human life were ever found and studied, questions of dignity, custody, and moral consideration would immediately arise. How would society handle remains that are not human but clearly biological? Who would decide the scope of study? What legal protections would be invoked? These are not purely hypothetical queries. They reflect the broader moral framework a society brings to encounters at the edge of its understanding. The way a government handles such matters speaks volumes about its priorities and its respect for both truth and community sentiment. Finally, it is important to recognize the human weight that accompanies these stories. Families and communities who believe they have lost something or who feel their accounts were suppressed carry grief, frustration, and sometimes a sense of betrayal. investigators entering such contexts must be gentle and patient. They must separate the emotional need for explanation from the empirical need for evidence. Good inquiry honors both dimensions. It listens with compassion while testing claims with methodical care. As we draw this chapter to a quiet close, imagine the windowless room again, but with a different light. A methodical team catalogues samples, notes every parameter, and prepares them for independent testing. Outside, conversations continue, some skeptical, some hopeful, some fearful. The question of whether alien bodies were ever recovered is one that touches on the deepest chords of curiosity and ethics. Whether the truth, when fully revealed, will soothe those chords or add new harmonics is a matter for careful, patient investigation. Chapter 8: The CIA's Psychological Operations and Alien Disinformation. There's a different kind of machinery that hums beneath the surface of national life. Not engines and hangars, but words, images, and carefully shaped narratives. Imagine a dim room where people in suits and analysts with tidy notes gather to consider not only what is true, but what the public is prepared to believe. In that quiet, the shape of a story matters as much as the shape of a device. The management of perception becomes a kind of technology itself, with methods and consequences that can ripple gently or with great force through a society. The idea that stories can be managed is not new. Governments have always used messaging to reassure, to persuade, and sometimes to withhold. What is different about the mid-20th century is the combination of powerful new media, radio, film, television, and secret programs that explored human cognition and influence. Intelligence services learned that controlling a narrative could be a strategic asset. If you can shape what people fear or notice, you can direct attention away from sensitive projects, influence political outcomes, or simply maintain calm in a tumultuous moment. Within this context, UFO narratives were an especially useful tool. They sit at an intersection of wonder and anxiety, curiosity and dread. A well-placed story about a harmless balloon or a misread weather phenomenon could soothe a population and, at the same time, divert attention from the silent work of engineers and intelligence services. In some instances, deliberate confusion, planting misleading reports or allowing certain rumors to circulate, could protect classified programs by overwhelming genuine curiosity with a fog of noise. In other cases, ambiguous statements helped preserve plausible deniability. The method is simple and practical. If everyone is chasing sensational stories, fewer people will follow the real, sensitive leads. This is not to suggest that every curious report was manufactured. Many sightings arose from honest observation and genuine confusion. But intelligence services did experiment with influence techniques, and some of those experiments bled into the broader cultural conversation. There are well-documented programs that study persuasion, behavior, and human vulnerability to suggestion. Researchers explored ways to alter perceptions, to shape memory, and to manipulate symbolism. These were sometimes justified in the language of national defense, to understand how an adversary might use such techniques, and sometimes they ventured into ethically fraught territory, where human subjects were involved in experiments without full consent. One of the most unsettling chapters in that history involves programs that probe the mind itself. Researchers tested methods of influencing behavior and thought, using drugs, sensory manipulation, and psychological stressors. The ethical breaches that emerged later in public inquiry are a reminder of how curiosity, when combined with secrecy and power, can become dangerous. In relation to UFO narratives, these experiments fed a larger frame. If human perception can be manipulated, then the boundary between what is seen and what is suggested becomes porous. A planted rumor, a staged sighting, or a carefully framed news story could recalibrate how whole communities interpreted anomalous events. Disinformation operates on a simple human logic: confuse, distract, and control the narrative arc. An intelligence analyst might ask, gently and quietly, what happens if a provocative story is seeded in the right places? Would the public dismiss subsequent related reports as hoaxes? Would investigative journalists be led down fruitless paths? The answers are neither purely cynical nor purely strategic. Their practices honed in tense eras when the cost of a technological surprise felt existential. The line between protective secrecy and manipulative deception is subtle and morally complex. Stories of deliberate disinformation around UFOs sometimes weave real programs with imagined conspiracies. There were occasions when officials publicly downplayed sightings while quietly investigating them. There were also occasions where misleading explanations were useful to obscure sensitive flight tests or intelligence operations. The public record shows a spectrum of behaviours: official calm where interior concern existed, and public denials where private work continued. From a distance, the mixture can look like a deliberate campaign of confusion. Up close, it often looks like bureaucratic caution and risk management. The human consequences of such operations deserve careful attention. Misinformation and secrecy can erode trust. When citizens later learn that official accounts were incomplete, they may feel betrayed. People who reported experiences and then faced dismissal or ridicule can be left with emotional scars. Families whose loved ones spoke of strange nights or odd encounters sometimes found themselves isolated. The social ripple of disinformation is therefore tangible. It can silence witnesses, discourage open inquiry, and create a lingering impression that truth is being withheld. At the same time, some use of ambiguous messaging was guided by strategic necessity. If revealing the true nature of a program would give an adversary a decisive advantage, officials faced a real dilemma: how to weigh the public's right to know against the imperative to protect national security. This is not a question with a single ethical answer. It is a question that must be navigated with transparency and oversight when possible, and with humility when secrecy is judged necessary. The moral challenge is to avoid letting prudence become a cover for manipulation. The interplay between psychological operations and UFO narratives also created strange cultural artifacts. Films, novels, and television programs absorbed the themes and amplified them. As entertainment absorbed the imagery of unknown craft and shadowy agencies, the public's appetite for conspiracy and wonder grew. Each dramatized scenario reframed the public imagination, providing fresh metaphors for secret programs and for the idea that governments might manage truth. Cultural feedback loops like these are subtle but powerful. Fiction shapes expectation shapes memory, and memory shapes future reporting. Whistleblowers and later inquiries have tried to pierce some of this fog. They raise questions about experiments, about the scope of influence campaigns, and about the ethics of moving public perception. For some, the revelations are clarifying. For others, they deepen unease. Importantly, a thoughtful approach asks us to listen to the stories of those who felt marginalized by official explanations. It also invites us to demand safeguards, stronger oversight of intelligence activities, ethical review of research involving human subjects, and transparent mechanisms to correct misinformation when it's discovered. As the chapter moves toward its close, picture a small briefing room where an analyst arranges slides and notes. Around the table sit people who know the weight of words and the cost of misjudgment. They debate how to frame a statement about sightings, weighing possible outcomes with deliberate calm. Outside, people read newspapers and watched the sky, forming beliefs from a mixture of observation and narrative. The lesson that emerges is neither purely cynical nor purely reassuring. The world of perception is fragile, and those who shape narratives carry a heavy responsibility. For listeners who have felt the tug of these stories, there is a gentle invitation to maintain curiosity tempered with critical thinking. Seek evidence, welcome independent review, and hold institutions accountable, while also recognizing the real pressures that prompt secrecy. The balance between transparency and security is delicate. It calls for persistent civic engagement and humane oversight. Chapter 9. Presidents, Power and Secrets. Imagine the hush of a presidential study late at night. The lamps are low, the curtains drawn, and the world beyond the windows is quiet. A leader sits alone with a small stack of secure envelopes, each stamped and handled with careful ceremony. These documents are the densest kind of custody, information marked eyes only, passed along protocols of clearance and discretion. The scene captures a soft but profound reality. Power is often exercised with limited sightlines, and those who hold it sometimes must decide how much to reveal, how much to conceal, and what to do with the knowledge they possess. When we ask what presidents have known about unexplained aerial phenomena, we are really asking two interconnected questions. What was presented to them, and what did they choose to do with the information? In some moments of history, commanders-in-chief have been briefed directly, ushered into secure rooms where analysts outlined sightings, radar tracks, and possible explanations. In other moments, vital details were filtered, summarized, or withheld entirely. A president might receive a tightly wrapped brief that emphasizes national security implications, or they might be given a broader assessment designed for public consumption. The difference between those formats shapes decisions in quiet and consequential ways. Consider the human element. Presidents are not only political actors, they're also people who have families and private rhythms. The experience of being told that something unexplained is happening in the skies can be disorienting and deeply personal. Some leaders may respond with pragmatic curiosity, asking for more data and appointing commissions. Others may be defensive, worried about national panic or the political fallout of uncertain facts. Still others may be skeptical, viewing such briefings as sensational and prioritizing immediate geopolitical concerns. Each response is shaped by personality, by the tenor of the times, and by the competing demands of governance. There are stories that feel almost cinematic. Late-night meetings where a president is told of an extraordinary encounter, alleged handshakes with emissaries, or restricted tours of secret facilities. One of the most persistent tales involves an alleged meeting between a president and representatives of another worldly origin, a narrative that has circulated in different forms and captured imaginations. These stories are dramatic because they suggest a level of access that transforms national leadership into witness. Whether such meetings took place as described is a matter of intense debate and scrutiny. What is perhaps more revealing is how these stories reflect anxieties about who decides what the public may know. Access itself is often constrained by the culture of compartmentalization. National security systems are built on the principle of need to know. Even the highest office can be insulated from certain detailed work if revealing it would create a risk. For example, research in specialized programs might be disclosed only to a handful of officials who must be directly involved in its oversight. The legal and bureaucratic rationale for this is often framed as protection against espionage or sabotage. The consequence, however, is that leaders who are nominally in charge of everything may learn only slices of a larger truth. It is a paradox of modern governance, absolute authority paired with practical limits on knowledge. The question of presidents trying to uncover truth and being blocked is both historical and procedural. There are moments when political leaders sought fuller information and faced institutional obstacles, layers of classification, contractor non-disclosure agreements, or judgments that certain details were too sensitive even for top officials. These barriers can be bureaucratic inertia, legal caution, or a genuine belief among program managers that limited disclosure protects national interests. The result is a delicate tension. Elected leaders who must answer to the public sometimes find their oversight hamstrung by the very systems meant to keep the nation secure. The chain of command for sensitive knowledge is itself a map filled with nodes and seals. Military commanders, agency heads, program directors, and congressional oversight committees each occupy a different place on that map. Oversight bodies in legislatures such as select intelligence committees exist precisely to bridge the gap between secrecy and accountability. Yet the efficacy of those bodies can vary depending on political will, the strength of institutional norms, and the clarity of law. In some eras, oversight has been robust and thorough. In others, it has been perfunctory or hamstrung by partisanship and legal complexity. The public sees the result as either trust or suspicion. Imagine a president receiving a classified briefing that summarizes a pattern of unexplained incursions. The briefing includes radar tracks that show abrupt accelerations and videos filmed from naval craft. The leader asks for names, sources, and confidence levels. How sure are analysts that this is foreign technology? How much could be explained by sensor error? And what are the implications for defense policy? In the best-case scenario, the president would receive a clear assessment accompanied by options: more research funding, diplomatic quiet, tighter oversight, or public disclosure. In the worst-case scenario, the briefing contains contradictions, redactions, and hedged language that offers little actionable clarity. That ambiguity is often where policy stalls and where rumors find fertile soil. There are also moments when presidents have acted, and those choices reveal much about the political calculus behind secrecy. Some leaders directed official inquiries, appointed panels of scientists, or authorized further testing. Others chose to maintain silence publicly while pressing their teams to gather more data privately. Political risk weighs heavily. The admission of unknown phenomena could provoke public anxiety or be seized upon by adversaries as evidence of vulnerability. Yet withholding information can erode trust if later revelations show that officials possessed knowledge that might have been responsibly shared. The dynamic between the White House and the intelligence community is complex and human. Analysts who brief presidents must translate technical detail into concise assessments, choosing words that convey probabilities and avoid sensationalism. Politicians must interpret those assessments in the context of larger issues: elections, foreign relations, public morale. This translation table is imperfect. Nuance can be lost when technical uncertainty meets the binary logic of politics. The push and pull between open inquiry and controlled secrecy is therefore not simply organizational. It is an everyday negotiation of language and meaning. Internationally, world leaders also face similar dilemmas. If one nation discloses certain knowledge, it could trigger a cascade of diplomatic decisions, technology races, or cooperative responses. Global politics complicates the question of disclosure. A revelation that seems benign to citizens might in fact reveal capabilities or vulnerabilities in military hardware, satellite systems, or intelligence methods. Leaders thus consider not only domestic consequences, but also how allies and adversaries will interpret new information. The international field shapes the prudence of disclosure in ways that are often invisible to the general public. The human stories around presidential knowledge are intimate and telling. A chief of staff might counsel caution, reminding the president that history favors the steady hand. An analyst might sit across from the leader, palms folded, and quietly suggest further study, noting the limits of present measurement. The curious president seeking clarity may form a small team, asking trusted advisors to dig deeper. Sometimes those teams uncover paperwork that explains a single incident neatly. Other times they find gaps and mysteries that deepen the puzzle. For those who inhabit these roles, the stakes are less about spectacle and more about responsibility, a sense that decisions may affect millions. There is also a moral question at the heart of secrecy. Should citizens be told when their leaders know more than the public? Democratic principles argue that transparency is a virtue, that citizens deserve to know what their government learns when it affects public safety or policy. Yet secrecy is sometimes justified by the need to protect research, preserve diplomatic options, or prevent panic. The balance between these competing goods, transparency and prudence, is one of the hardest political judgments a leader can make. Finally, consider how culture interprets these dynamics. Stories of hidden briefings, of presidents kept in the dark, feed public suspicion. Films and books dramatize these scenes, often painting leaders as either noble truth seekers or complicit gatekeepers. These narratives shape public expectations, sometimes unfairly simplifying complex institutional realities. The gentle lesson to carry forward is that governance at the highest levels is often a negotiation of partial truths, competing interests, and imperfect information. Leaders may act with good intent and still make choices that later appear questionable. As this chapter winds down, picture a late-night Oval Office moment. The president looks out across a darkened lawn, fingers steepled, reflecting on reports that have passed across his desk. He knows the weight of decisions made behind closed doors and the cost of choices that determine what the public should know. He places the documents back into their secure envelope, not as an act of concealment for its own sake, but as a gesture in a larger fraught process where every revelation must be weighed for consequence and context. There is no simple answer to what presidents know about unexplained aerial phenomena. Sometimes they know a lot, sometimes they are intentionally shielded, sometimes they frustrate investigators seeking clarity. The enduring fact is that power and secrecy are entangled, and that the decisions made in quiet rooms ripple outward in ways that shape public trust and historical memory. For the curious listener, the calm path forward is clear. Demand transparency where possible, insist on accountable oversight, and recognize the human complexity behind every official choice. Chapter 10: The Pentagon's Secret UFO Programs. Imagine a quiet office deep inside a government building, the kind of room where paper is sealed in folders and lights are softened to protect sensitive displays. A small team gathers around a table strewn with annotated videos, transcripts, and radar plots. There is no dramatic fanfare here, only careful work and the hush of people doing the slow work of learning what little they can from imperfect signals. This is the setting in which secret programs devoted to unexplained aerial phenomena took shape, not as sensational spectacles, but as methodical efforts to collect data, analyze it, and determine whether a risk, an innovation, or something else was hidden in plain sight. The earliest formal efforts inside the Department of Defense to look at anomalous aerial events were often pragmatic. People in uniform and analysts in civilian shirts were confronted with incidents that involved military assets, naval aviators reporting encounters, sensors picking up objects moving in ways that challenge known aerodynamics, and videos that seemed to show craft performing maneuvers outside conventional envelopes. Those who handled such reports faced a basic set of questions. What happened? How reliable are the sensors? Is this a training or safety issue? And could this be an adversary capability? Over time, the accumulation of difficult-to-explain reports created enough momentum to justify structured programs devoted specifically to the problem. One striking aspect of these programs is their quiet, iterative nature. They begin with intake, preserving video evidence, collecting witness accounts, and cross-checking sensor logs. Investigators work to align what pilots saw with what radar recorded, with acoustic signatures, and with any other available telemetry. The goal is not instant revelation, but steady clarification. In some cases, ambiguous video becomes clearer when paired with logs. In others, contradictions remain and deepen the mystery. This patient, forensic approach is the hallmark of serious inquiry. It values corroboration over conjecture and documentation over spectacle. Alongside this investigative work is the organizational story, how offices are created, renamed and restructured as priorities shift. The language around these programs can feel opaque. Acronyms appear and evolve, departments are stood up and given charters, and oversight structures are adjusted. This bureaucratic choreography matters. It determines what gets funding, who has authority to access classified material, and how findings are shared with policymakers. For people committed to understanding the phenomena, these procedural details are neither trivial nor sinister. They are the mechanisms by which research moves from fragmented reports to organized, testable studies. Within these programs, the role of military pilots and sailors is central. They are often the first observers when something unexpected enters their airspace. Their training gives their observations weight. They know aircraft behavior and can describe maneuvers with a language that engineers and analysts respect. When a squadron reports an object that accelerates with no apparent propulsion, or that rotates in mid-air without losing altitude, those reports prompt a particular kind of attention. Investigators want to know whether sensors were faulty, whether atmospheric effects created illusions, or whether some other explanation better fits the data. The respectful, methodical interviews of trained observers are a foundational step in building any credible case. Another important element in these programs is the treatment of recorded data. Videos from aircraft cameras, infrared sensors, and shipboard systems can be compelling, but they are also tricky. Sensors have limitations. Cameras can distort distance and speed, and infrared displays render heat in ways that can make objects appear to move oddly. Analysts therefore place heavy emphasis on cross-sensor validation. Did radar also see the object? Did other craft confirm it visually? Is there a maintenance log suggesting a camera artifact? When multiple sensors converge on a single event, confidence rises. When they diverge, analysts proceed with caution, documenting uncertainty rather than rushing to conclusions. Whistleblowers and insiders who later speak publicly add texture and tension to this picture. Some have described frustration at bureaucratic limits, claiming that certain findings were downplayed or not pursued as vigorously as they thought appropriate. Others have recounted the thrill of seeing data that did not fit conventional models, recordings that suggested high acceleration with no sonic boom, or signatures inconsistent with known propulsion. These personal accounts, whether cautious or dramatic, remind us that a human effort underlies the files, curious people asking questions and sometimes bumping against institutional constraints. How institutions respond to such constraints is a matter of policy and culture. When analysts encounter anomalous data, they must recommend courses of action, invest in further sensors, set up controlled observation campaigns, or broaden scientific participation. These choices have costs and benefits. Installing more sensors and funding cross-discipline research helps move the field forward, but budgets are finite and priorities compete. The question of how much to invest reflects values as much as empirical judgment. Does the potential national security implication or the possibility of novel discovery warrant sustained funding? different leaders answer that question in different ways, producing the episodic nature of public programs. Another dimension is the public narrative that forms after elements of these programs become known. When information leaks or is declassified, the public receives a curated slice of the whole story. Sometimes the newly revealed material shows an agency taking the matter seriously, underscoring a commitment to understanding. Other times, the available documents reveal more confusion than certainty, a jumble of reports, inconsistent observations, and cautious assessments that stop short of definitive claims. The tension between what is known internally and what is disclosed externally can fuel speculation, a natural human response to gaps in knowledge. The interplay between operational caution and scientific openness also matters. Scientists outside of defense circles often request access to data to run independent analyses. Institutional leaders must balance the benefits of broader scientific engagement, fresh perspectives, reproducibility, peer review, with the need to protect sensitive capabilities and methods. Sometimes redaction and limited sharing are necessary. Other times, openness accelerates understanding. Striking that balance is a slow, sometimes contentious process that shapes how much light ultimately reaches the public. There is also a sober, practical dimension to these programs: concern for safety. Even if an unidentified object turns out not to be extraterrestrial, unexplained incursions into restricted airspace or near military assets can pose risks to flight safety and to strategic stability. Ensuring that pilots and sailors are not endangered by unexpected objects is a public good. This safety imperative often motivates immediate operational responses. Updated training, cautionary advisories, and calls for reporting protocols that improve the fidelity of collected data. When we step back, we see that the arc of these programs is a story of institutional learning. Early in the process, reports are fragmented and ad hoc. Over time, mechanisms develop to collect better data, to coordinate across military and civilian agencies, and to institutionalize good practices for analysis. The best-case scenario is one where cross-disciplinary teams, engineers, physicists, radar specialists, and human factors experts work together, subjecting claims to rigorous testing and sharing breakthroughs with appropriate oversight. In such a scenario, mystery is not the endpoint, but the beginning of a structured inquiry. For viewers who find these matters unsettling or thrilling, there is a gentle reassurance in the way serious inquiry proceeds, slowly, cautiously, and with attention to method. The Pentagon's efforts are not a single uniform program, but a series of evolving responses shaped by events, politics, and the quality of available data. Some initiatives emphasize scientific study, others focus on safety and risk management, and still others reflect institutional inertia. The human constant through all of this is the desire to know more, to convert anecdote into evidence, fear into understanding. As this chapter closes, picture the small team again, surrounded by annotated frames from a video, a printout of a radar track, and a notebook with careful dated entries. They're not searching for spectacle. They're doing the painstaking work of matching observation with instrument and of moving step by step toward clarity. The process is imperfect and sometimes frustrating, but it is earnest. It follows the same patient practices that have guided other scientific inquiries: document, test, replicate, and peer review when possible. The history of these programs will likely continue to unfold in ways we cannot fully predict. What feels certain is that the Pentagon's secret efforts to understand unexplained aerial phenomena are part of the broader human enterprise of reducing uncertainty. They are an institutional expression of curiosity, caution, and responsibility, an attempt to learn what the skies are telling us while safeguarding those who watch them. Chapter 11. whistleblowers and insiders, breaking the silence. There is a fragile courage to speaking when everyone around you has been told to stay quiet. Imagine a small room where a person sits with hands folded, a script of their life pressed into the thin weight of a badge and a clearance form. They have held blueprints, opened sealed crates, and listened to briefings behind locked doors. They have watched colleagues sign oaths and watched projects vanish behind additional layers of paperwork. Then one day they decide to tell a story, to risk career, reputation, and sometimes personal safety, to say what they believe they have seen. The telling itself becomes an act of weather, changing the atmosphere around a quiet program and inviting both scrutiny and solace. Whistleblowers who speak about unexplained phenomena often arrive at their moment with complex motives. Some feel moral obligation. They believe the public has a right to know when events touch public safety or democratic oversight. Others are driven by frustration, by years of unanswered questions, by the sense that credible evidence has been minimized and discarded. Some seek institutional reform, hoping that disclosure will create clearer reporting channels and better protections for those who observe unusual incidents. And some speak simply because silence has become unbearable. They want the burden of secrecy lifted, even at great personal cost. The life of a whistleblower is rarely glamorous in the ways a movie might depict. More often, it is lonely. Friends and colleagues can become distant. Security clearances are revoked or suspended, and the person's professional world can contract sharply. Families feel pressure, and public attention, when it arrives, can be relentless. In that pressure, the human cost is real. Careers may stall, livelihoods may be threatened, and emotional stress can be intense. For many who speak out, the reward is not fame, but the relief of having unburdened themselves and the hope that the truth will follow. The credibility of insiders matters greatly. A claim from someone with decades of technical experience, relevant clearance, and documented service carries different weight than a second-hand account. Investigators and the public therefore assess not only what is said, but who says it. Patterns matter. When multiple independent insiders tell similar stories about unusual materials, anomalous propulsion signatures, or restricted programs, the repetition becomes a signal that invites deeper scrutiny. In the quiet world of classified work, independent corroboration is gold. It increases confidence and helps translate anecdote into something investigatable. At the same time, the process of verification is complicated. Classified programs, by design, conceal specific locations, methodologies, and documents. A whistleblower may provide details that cannot be publicly released without harming legitimate security interests, and that tension makes public adjudication difficult. Oversight bodies, like select congressional committees, sometimes review claims in closed sessions where sensitive evidence can be assessed with appropriate protections. These private reviews are essential. They allow classified material to be examined by those with the legal authority to do so, but they also mean that the wider public must often wait for sanitized summaries, which can fuel suspicion. When whistleblowers go public, through interviews, sworn testimony, or memoirs, the media spotlight follows. Public hearings, when convened, provide dramatic stages where claims are aired and pushed by questioning. These moments can be clarifying. Documents are introduced, timelines are sketched, and previously hidden patterns sometimes emerge. They can also be messy, because classified evidence cannot always be presented in public, and because witnesses may differ in recall or emphasis. The result is rarely a neat verdict. Instead, the public sees a human process of inquiry: claims, rebuttals, corroboration, redaction, and incremental clarification. Patterns in credible insider reports are worth attending to gently. Over years of testimony, certain themes reappear: recovered debris that resists normal testing, sensor data that records performance outside known envelopes, and instances where personnel were reassigned, silenced, or signed strict non-disclosure agreements after encountering unusual objects. These patterns do not prove a single extraordinary thesis, but they do create a map of recurring issues that deserve careful institutional attention. Good inquiry asks whether the patterns reflect unknown physics, misattributed terrestrial technology, bureaucratic overreach, or some combination of these factors. The motivations of institutions in responding to whistleblowers are also varied. At their best, agencies treat allegations seriously. They open investigations, preserve evidence, and protect those who come forward from retaliation. At their worst, institutions may reflexively discredit insiders, dismiss them as mistaken, or respond with punitive measures. The culture within an organization shapes much of this behavior. Cultures that value candor, oversight, and corrective action tend to produce healthier outcomes than cultures that prize secrecy above all else. Legal protections for whistleblowers exist in many jurisdictions to guard against reprisals. Those laws matter. They allow people to raise concerns about wrongdoing or hazards without immediate fear of losing a livelihood. Yet the interplay between whistleblower law and national security is tricky. Classified evidence cannot be casually disclosed under whistleblower protections if it reveals sensitive methods or threatens lives. The law therefore carves careful contours. It offers channels, protected briefings to oversight committees, independent inspector generals, and other secure mechanisms through which serious concerns can be raised while protecting legitimate secrets. Yet the effectiveness of these channels depends on institutional will and clarity of process. Beyond legalities, there is the social effect of whistleblower revelations. When a respected insider speaks, it can change the public conversation. People who were previously skeptical may listen with new curiosity. Journalists who ignored a story may reopen files. Researchers may request access to datasets. The ripple effect sometimes leads to reform, improved reporting systems for pilots and sailors, investments in sensor networks, and the creation of cross-agency task forces. These institutional changes are often incremental and quiet, but they can be meaningful. They move the needle from rumor towards systematic understanding. Whistleblowers also shape culture in subtler ways. They affect how future generations of technicians and analysts think about their duty, whether their obligation is to secrecy, to public safety, or to a mix of both. When brave insiders are protected and their claims are investigated transparently, it reinforces norms of accountability. When they are punished or ignored, it can chill inquiry and make organizations more inward-facing. The stakes are not only epistemic, they are civic. Healthy democracies require mechanisms to bring credible concerns into daylight, even when those concerns touch classified domains. There's also a human drama in the way whistleblowers tell their stories. They often begin with small, precise memories. A meeting in a secure room, a mislabeled crate, a line in a maintenance log that read differently than it should. From these small things, a broader tapestry is woven. Effective investigators know that truth often hides in details: dates, names, technical specifications, and chains of custody. They look for documentation that can be independently verified. They triangulate, matching interviews with logs, video timestamps, and procurement records. This forensic patience separates fleeting rumor from investigable fact. Another delicate truth is that some insiders are mistaken without being dishonest. Memory is fallible, especially when shaped by long exposure to secrecy, stress, or conflicting stories. People conflate dates, misremember technical details, or interpret ordinary practices through the lens of extraordinary possibility. Investigators familiar with classified programs are used to this human elasticity of memory and therefore seek corroboration. This is not a dismissal of the person. It is recognition of how complex these environments are. Whistleblowers who reveal alleged recovered craft or non-human technology often face intense skepticism, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The scientific standard asks for reproducible, independently verified data. When insiders provide such data, material samples amenable to laboratory testing, multiple sensor logs that align, or corroborating testimony from unrelated witnesses, their claims take on new weight. When such evidence cannot be produced or verified, the claims remain intriguing but unresolved. The patient work of verification is slow but essential. The personal stories of those who risk everything to speak also deserve tenderness. Some have described sleepless nights, endless interviews, and the strain of public attention. Family members sometimes bear equal burden. Spouses worry about security and livelihoods. For everyone involved, the act of disclosure is a human sacrifice bound up with hope. Hope that truth will bring change, that it will inspire better oversight, that it will make the world safer or clearer. That hope is not naive, it is a steady human impulse toward accountability. Finally, consider the quiet, positive outcomes that can follow responsible whistleblowing. When credible insiders bring forward verified information, institutions often respond by strengthening procedures, improving data collection, and investing in scientific expertise. When the public is responsibly informed, democratic oversight can function more effectively. And when the culture shifts toward protecting and listening to credible witnesses, the long-term relationship between citizens and institutions improves. These are the kinds of changes that heal mistrust over time. As we bring this chapter to a close, picture a person in a modest home, speaking into a camera with measured words. They have prepared, consulted counsel, and weighed consequences. Behind them are stacks of documents and the quiet knowledge that what they say will ripple outward. For listeners, there is a gentle invitation. Listen, not with instant judgment, but with patience. Ask for verification, welcome independent review, and remember that the work of truth is often incremental, collaborative, and sometimes painfully slow. Chapter 12. The Hidden Files, Classified Leaks and Missing Evidence. There is a particular sound to a file cabinet being closed, a soft, final click that seems to say, "This matter is done." But sometimes that click is only the beginning of a different story, one that unfolds in shadows and margins. The tale of hidden files and missing evidence is not merely a catalogue of documents. It is a human drama about record-keeping, power, accident, and intention. Imagine walking down a corridor of offices late at night, light spilling from one doorway where an analyst stamps a cover sheet, and then pausing in another where a clerk discovers a box that should not be empty. That moment, between expectation and the small shock of absence, captures the quiet anxiety that surrounds classified archives. Records disappear for many reasons. Sometimes it is simple human error, a misfiled report, a mislabeled folder, an archive catalogued under the wrong year. Paper is physical and fragile. It can be lost during moving, damaged by water or pests, or misplaced when staff change roles. These mundane problems account for a surprising number of records that vanish from official inventories. In an organization that processes large volumes of paperwork, small errors compound. A single missing memo can create a puzzle when researchers later seek to trace a chain of decisions or to corroborate a witness's memory. The human fallibility of bureaucracies is often the least dramatic explanation, and yet it is both common and consequential. There are also procedural reasons why documents are sealed or redacted. governments classify material to protect national security. When documents contain details about intelligence sources, sensitive technological designs, or ongoing operations, redaction is a legal and institutional response meant to avoid harm. Redaction can cover names, technical specifics, or locations. When a file is released in redacted form, citizens see a shadow of the original text. Words removed in black bars, whole sections withheld. Those black bars create a visual metaphor for secrecy. They make absence visible and invite the imagination to fill the blanks. For those seeking clarity, redaction is both useful and frustrating. It protects, yet it creates a hunger for the larger context. Sometimes documents appear to have been altered. Paper trails can be edited for reasons both legitimate and suspect. A routine legal review might remove personally identifying information before release. Conversely, there are cases where documents were altered to obscure oversight failures or to protect reputations. Determining motive is delicate work. Investigators look for archival metadata, paper stock differences, ink composition, and chain of custody records to understand whether an alteration was benign or intentionally misleading. The forensic study of documents is itself a practiced craft, requiring careful comparison and the patience to follow tiny clues. Leaking is another human vector through which files become public, sometimes partially, sometimes fully. Whistleblowers and leakers may choose to disclose materials to journalists, oversight committees, or researchers. Leaks can be motivated by conscience, by a desire to reform, or by more personal reasons such as retaliation or fame. When genuine leaks have uncovered abuses, corrected official narratives, and spurred public debate. But leaks also raise questions about context and interpretation. A single document excerpt shown without surrounding material can be misleading. Responsible disclosure requires careful curation, accompanied by documentation that preserves provenance and explains technical terms. Without that care, a leak can inflame rather than illuminate. There are also stories of files that vanish in more troubling ways, crates found emptied, hard drives erased, or entire office sections closed and sealed with little explanation. Such events stir suspicion. Were materials intentionally removed to hide wrongdoing, or were they transferred to higher security repositories for legitimate reasons? Investigators ask hard questions. Who ordered the removal? Where were the items transported? And what logs document the movement? Chain of custody forms are the backbone of such inquiries. When the chain is incomplete or deliberately obscured, doubt grows and the public imagination rushes in to fill the gaps. Independent researchers and archivists play a central role in this drama. They file requests, pore over indexes, and follow leads through far-flung repositories. Tools like freedom of information requests and archival audits exist to pry open doors. Yet the process is painstaking and often slow. Requests can be denied on grounds of national security or fulfilled only after extended legal battles. Even when records are released, they may be heavily redacted or trimmed to the point where their utility is limited. The patient labour of archival research demands not only curiosity, but also bureaucratic competence, knowing which office holds what, how to phrase a request, and how to follow up on partial releases. Another part of the story is the human cost of hidden or altered files. Families seeking closure after accidents or alleged incidents may find themselves denied access to relevant records. Researchers looking to corroborate witness testimony may hit a wall of silence. The social consequences can be profound. When institutions withhold or misplace records, public trust erodes. People who believe they have been wronged feel isolated and dismissed. The ripple effects extend beyond a single missing memo. They degrade confidence in the institutions meant to serve and protect. There are also institutional incentives that shape what survives in the archive. Organizations may emphasize documents that reflect well on their performance and deprioritize ones that expose failure. Budget constraints and changing leadership priorities affect what is preserved. Archivists often face hard choices: limited storage, evolving data formats, and the cost of digitization mean not everything can be saved. Decisions about retention policies, while technical, have moral implications. What does it mean for a democracy when records of controversial programs are not preserved? Those policy choices shape the historical record in ways that are often invisible until someone tries to reconstruct the past. In the realm of UFO-related material, these archival dynamics take on particular poignancy because of the high public interest and the stakes involved. Researchers report gaps, references to documents that cannot be found, footnotes pointing to annexes that never appear in releases, and press statements that promise disclosure but deliver only partial files. The effect is cumulative. When multiple archives show similar patterns of redaction, misfiling, or disappearance, the public's suspicion grows, and with it, demand for independent oversight and better record management. But there are practical ways to pursue clarity. Meticulous researchers make use of what is available, cross-referencing reports, interviewing witnesses, and triangulating dates and procurement records. Oral histories, for example, can fill gaps left by missing paper, providing context and human detail. Scientific measurements and raw sensor data, when obtainable, can sometimes substitute for missing narrative. A radar log file can speak where a memo is absent. Legal avenues, litigation to compel the release of withheld records, have also succeeded in some cases. The slow, patient craft of combining fragments into a coherent picture is, in itself, a form of truth-seeking. There is also a sober recognition that secrecy sometimes protects lives. Certain details, technical specifications of weapons, intelligence sources, or methods of vulnerability assessment must be handled carefully to prevent harm. The tension between the public's right to know and the necessity to protect security is real and unresolved. The healthiest outcomes come when oversight bodies, with proper clearance and independence, can review sensitive material and then provide accountable summaries to the public. That institutional scaffolding, robust oversight, clear retention policies, and an ethical culture around classification reduces the need for ad hoc secrecy that breeds suspicion. The culture of redaction and secrecy also nudges innovation. Digital preservation techniques, forensic document analysis, and open data initiatives have improved researchers' ability to detect alteration and to reconstruct missing information. Technology that timestamps files, verifies authenticity through cryptographic hashes, and archives metadata can make it far harder to alter records without detection. Advocates for transparency often push for adopting such systems, arguing that a combination of modern tools and legal safeguards can protect both security and public accountability. Another human dimension deserves attention: the whistleblower who hands a file to a journalist or a historian. Their act can be heroic, fraught, and legally risky. When handled responsibly, such disclosures can illuminate patterns and correct official misstatements. When handled carelessly, they can endanger sources or be misused. Ethical practices in journalism and scholarship, verifying provenance, seeking independent confirmation, and respecting privacy matter greatly. The way media and researchers treat leaked material influences whether leaks become productive contributions to public understanding or corrosive episodes of rumor. Finally, there is the question of meaning. Missing files do not, by themselves, prove a single grand conspiracy. absence can stem from bureaucracy, from legitimate secrecy, from human error, or from intentional suppression. The job of careful inquiry is to sort among those possibilities without jumping to dramatic conclusions. That requires patience, documents, corroboration, and, above all, humane curiosity. For listeners who have felt frustrated by gaps in the record, there is a practical path forward. Support independent archival projects, encourage stronger oversight regimes, and demand that institutions adopt best practices for retention, verification, and transparency. As this chapter draws to a close, picture a researcher in a small reading room surrounded by stacks of boxes. She traces a line of correspondence, maps the chain of custody, and makes careful notes. A catalogue entry leads to another box, and within it, a thin folder with a single memo that changes an interpretation. That small discovery, the finding of one document among thousands, is a quiet victory. It reminds us that archives are not static mausoleums, but living gardens where patient tending yields new blossoms of understanding. Chapter 13. Global Involvement. What Other Nations Know. Picture a map laid out on a long table, the kind an intelligence office might use. Lines of latitude and longitude crossing continents, pins marking bases and thin threads connecting capitals. Each pin is a story waiting to be told. A radar blip in the Arctic, a Navy log from the South China Sea, a farmer's report from the Russian tundra. The mystery of aerial phenomena does not belong to a single nation. It drifts across borders like weather, collecting different interpretations as it moves. To understand the global picture, we must slow down and listen to the many voices, official and unofficial, that have watched the skies. The Soviet Union, in its day, produced a particular texture to the phenomenon. Imagine a long, northern night, the sky pale with aurora, and instruments tuned for surveillance of an adversary. In that context, any unexplained signature acquired a double meaning. It could be an advanced enemy system, a natural atmospheric anomaly, or something else entirely. Soviet intelligence, like Western services, kept close watch on objects that entered controlled airspace. The political stakes were high. A misunderstood sighting risked escalation between nuclear-armed powers. This reality pushed many governments to treat reports with extra caution, preferring hush until clearer assessments could be made. The result was parallel secrecy. Both East and West developed closed circuits of analysis, and often withheld findings from their own publics for reasons of stability. China's engagement with aerial anomalies has its own contours. In a nation with large land masses, dense population centres, and a rapidly modernising military, sightings become entwined with technological concerns and domestic controls. The question for many governments is not only whether an object represents extraterrestrial intelligence, but whether it represents a new human-made capability, from drones to advanced surveillance systems. As nations modernise sensors, satellite constellations and air defences, they also produce more data, and with more data come more puzzles. A bright, vast object for an international waterway can be a diplomatic incident, an operational hazard, or a research opportunity. The geopolitical context makes every sighting a possible piece in larger strategic games. Europe adds another layer of complexity. The continent's many nations have different traditions of openness, different histories with military secrecy, and varying relationships to public trust. Some European countries have declassified their civil aviation reports at length, inviting academic study. Others have kept files more tightly controlled. The European Union and NATO create forums for information exchange, but national sensitivities often remain paramount. For countries with dense air traffic and crowded skies, The mixture of civilian and military reports creates a mosaic of sightings that researchers must carefully untangle. In some cases, national archives reveal decades of intriguing reports. In others, the records are sparse, redacted, or inconsistent. A crucial piece of this global puzzle is international cooperation. Imagine two analysts in separate cities, one with a radar trace and the other with a pilot's testimony. When they connect, patterns that seemed isolated begin to align. Intelligence sharing among allies, when it happens, can reveal whether an anomaly is a single local event or part of a larger series. Multilateral forums, scientific exchanges, and diplomatic channels can all help create a fuller picture. Yet cooperation is never automatic. Political mistrust, concerns about revealing capabilities, and different classification systems make sharing messy. The result can be a tapestry with 1,000 small patches that only occasionally line up into a coherent pattern. Different nations also bring different investigative cultures. Scientific communities in some countries are encouraged to publish and share data openly. In others, classified research channels are the norm. This variance affects how quickly phenomena are studied and whether results are subject to peer review. Academic openness fosters replication and cross-validation, building a more robust knowledge base. Classification, while often necessary for security, can slow the process of independent verification. The interplay between open science and controlled research is thus central to how the global community understands, and sometimes misunderstands, the skies. Transparency varies too, and that variation shapes public perception. Some countries have been more forthcoming, releasing files and encouraging academic work, which fosters public confidence and creates a body of research accessible to journalists and scholars. Other nations have been more reserved, and where secrecy is common, rumour and speculation find fertile ground. The cultural relationship to authority, how citizens trust or distrust their institutions, also colours how UFO-related disclosures are received. In some places, official silence is accepted as prudent. In others, it breeds distrust and conspiracy. There are also practical reasons nations might cooperate quietly. Shared airspace, overlapping flight corridors, and satellite tracks that cross borders all create situations where multiple actors observe the same object from different vantage points. Combining observations from different sensor types, radar, satellite, visual, and infrared, yields a more complete picture. A radar-only report gains new meaning when a satellite pass reveals a thermal signature at the same time. A pilot's close-range observation can clarify ambiguous sensor readings. International scientific cooperation, when it manages to overcome political friction, can transform fragmentary data into reproducible science. Another important dimension is historical. Nations that experienced intense periods of conflict or secrecy sometimes left behind different archival footprints. Some files were preserved and later declassified, others disappeared into the paperwork of collapsed agencies. The archival history of a nation affects what researchers can access today. Scholars who cross borders to study these matters often find a patchwork of well-kept records beside yawning gaps. Oral histories, memoirs of former officers, and careful cross-referencing of international logs become essential tools when paper trails are incomplete. The detective work is slow, but over time it assembles a map of shared and divergent experiences. An often overlooked element is how cultural lenses shape interpretation. In one culture, an unexplained light might be framed through folklore, in another through technical language. The narratives people bring to their observations shape what they report and how they pursue follow-up. Anthropologists and historians remind us that what we see is often filtered through stories we already know, about spirits, foreign weapons, or celestial phenomena. Understanding those cultural frames helps investigators separate the phenomenology, what happened, from the interpretive overlay, how it was made sense of. There are also diplomatic risks and opportunities embedded in disclosure. If a country publicly admits to having recovered materials or extraordinary incidents, it risks sparking regional arms races or international scrutiny. Conversely, transparency can be an instrument of soft power. A nation that demonstrates rigorous, open scientific inquiry can build trust and attract collaboration. Diplomatic channels can be used to coordinate research, to share data securely, and to create international standards for reporting and analysis. The slow formation of norms, agreements about how to document and share anomalous events, could reduce misinterpretation and enhance safety. Some nations have comparative advantages: remote islands with clear skies, dense networks of civilian aircraft or advanced satellites. These advantages translate into different kinds of data density. For instance, countries with strong civilian reporting infrastructures may produce a high volume of credible eyewitness accounts, while those with extensive satellite assets may provide unmatched cross-sectional sensor data. Integrating these different strengths into a coherent global database would be a powerful step forward, but it requires trust, funding, and political will. The question of whether other countries are more transparent than the United States or vice versa is complex. Transparency is not a single switch, but a set of policies and cultural practices. Some nations may release certain categories of information more readily, while withholding other data for security reasons. Others may have legal regimes that favour broad public access. The comparison depends on the specific files, the period under review, and the political context. What matters most for the global community is the creation of reliable, jointly vetted standards and the slow building of relationships that allow data to be shared responsibly. In practical terms, what would better global collaboration look like? Imagine an international consortium of scientists and sensors designed to collect multimodal data and to standardize reporting formats. Think of shared protocols for preserving evidence, confidential channels for classified data, and joint working groups that reconcile national perspectives. Such a framework would not dissolve sovereignty, but it would create bridges, carefully negotiated and legally supported, that allow the world to learn more together than any single nation can alone. There's a poetic side to all of this. When we look up at the sky, our vantage is simultaneously local and global. The same object can be seen differently from different shores, yet together those views form the possibility of a fuller truth. The global story of unexplained aerial phenomena is thus a mirror of humanity's distributed curiosity, many hands reaching to understand a common mystery. If nations can combine their strengths, satellites with radars, pilots with scientists, archives with oral histories, the result may be less about declaring winners or losing secrets, and more about building collective knowledge. As this chapter softens to its close, picture that table with the map once more. Pins lift, threads tug, and new connections appear. Across oceans and across political divides, there are people doing patient work. Archivists unearthing files, scientists standardizing protocols, and analysts quietly comparing data. The progress is slow, but it is real. The more countries talk, carefully, respectfully, and with proper safeguards, the more the sky's puzzling stories begin to form a shape that many can understand together. Chapter 14. The Alien Presence on Earth. Are they already here? There is a deep, slow kind of wondering that takes hold when people begin to ask not whether something visited the skies, but whether it remained. Imagine a quiet evening in a small town, lights dimmed, a radio murmuring distant news, and someone stepping outside to look up. That act, lifting the eyes toward the night, carries with it a question both simple and vast. What if the visitors never left? The thought is not meant to startle. Instead, it invites a calm, methodical exploration of the claims, the evidence, and the human impulses that shape them. When people speak of an alien presence already on Earth, they mean different things. For some, it is a suggestion that non-human intelligences have been observed, monitored, or even interacting with humans for decades. For others, the phrase raises images of secret pacts between governments and otherworldly beings, underground bases where hybrid programs are conducted, or systematic monitoring of abduction reports. To walk through this terrain without alarm, we will consider each thread gently. The reports of ongoing contact, the institutional responses, the narratives of secret agreements, and the scientific and social frameworks that make sense of these claims. Begin with monitoring and abduction cases because they are among the most personal and emotionally charged reports. Throughout the modern era, individuals have come forward describing episodes of missing time, vivid memories of being in strange rooms, and encounters with beings that defy ordinary description. Many of these accounts share common features: a sense of paralysis, bright lights, clinical procedures, and interactions that feel both intimate and clinical. For the people who report them, the experience can be traumatic, confusing, and isolating. They ask for understanding, validation, and sometimes for official recognition that their experience matters. From a scientific perspective, the study of such accounts requires care and humility. Human perception is complex. Sleep paralysis, temporal lobe phenomena, hypnagogic imagery, and cultural suggestion can all shape how an event is experienced and later recalled. At the same time, a subset of reports come from multiple witnesses or from trained observers, and some are accompanied by physical traces, scorched earth, impressions in soil, or corroborating instrument logs. Researchers who approach these cases with clinical rigor seek comparable patterns, look for independent corroboration, and apply controlled methods to test hypotheses. The aim is not to dismiss, but to distinguish, to find which reports can be explained by known causes and which, if any, remain genuinely anomalous after careful study. A related question is whether governments monitor abduction claims or other contact events. Records and testimonies suggest that over time, some agencies collected reports, evaluated them for patterns, and sometimes preserved the data confidentially. Where this happened, the motivation was often twofold: concern for public safety and the desire to rule out adversarial technologies. In some instances, a cluster of similar reports in a region prompted quiet surveillance or sensor deployments, not because an alien intelligence was assumed, but because repeated unexplained incursions warranted investigation as potential hazards to civil aviation or local communities. The presence of institutional monitoring does not on its own confirm extraterrestrial contact. It does show that authorities sometimes take patterns of reports seriously enough to study them. Another delicate and persistent theme in public imagination is the idea of secret agreements between extraterrestrials and human authorities. These narratives suggest arrangements made in the shadows, exchanges of technology for access, deals struck to avoid public panic, or pacts that negotiated terms of observation. Stories of this kind are dramatic because they propose a moral calculus. What might a government trade to secure advanced knowledge, and at what human cost? To assess such claims calmly, one must look for documentation. Multiple independent testimonies, corroborating records, and physical evidence. Absent that level of verification, such stories remain in the realm of intriguing conjecture. They nevertheless persist because they answer deep anxieties about control, sovereignty, and the unknown. Closely tied to secret pacts are the ideas of underground bases and hybridization programs. These are images that have long fueled speculation. Vast subterranean complexes where biological experiments are conducted, where human and non-human DNA are studied, or where hybrid beings are said to be produced. The practical questions here are substantial. Building and operating large subterranean facilities requires vast resources, logistics, and many people. The more complex the alleged program, the harder it becomes to conceal over long periods without leaks, logistical traces, or corroborating procurement records. Investigators who take such claims seriously seek documentary trails, contracts, construction records, procurement logs, or independent satellite imagery that might reveal unusual construction patterns. The absence of such corroboration makes the grandest claims less likely. Even as smaller scale, localized anomalies remain possible avenues of inquiry. There's also a cultural and psychological explanation for why these themes resonate. Human myths often adapt to the technological frames of their age. The medieval mind gave demons and angels form. The modern mind gives spacecraft and laboratories. Hybridization narratives reflect deep concerns about bodily autonomy, identity, and what it means to be human in an age of accelerating biotechnology. Whether these stories are literal or symbolic, they articulate profound anxieties and hopes about human fate in a changing world. A different, more measured question is whether any material evidence exists that would move the conversation beyond anecdote. Scientific standards demand replicable, independently verifiable data. Trace materials with unique isotopic signatures, instrument logs from multiple sensor types showing consistent anomalies, or biologic samples that defy all known taxonomy. When such evidence has been proposed, it has often been accompanied by controversy, debate over provenance, chain of custody, and reproducibility. The scientific community is cautious for good reason. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary verification. The path forward is clear in principle. Rigorous testing in accredited laboratories, pre-registered protocols, and transparent sharing of raw data when security concerns permit. If there were ongoing contact, why would secrecy persist? Several practical reasons often appear in thoughtful analyses. First, governments might judge that public disclosure could lead to societal disruption, economic panic, religious upheaval, or geopolitical instability. Second, if advanced technology were involved, national security concerns about proliferation would weigh heavily. Third, the institutional habit of classifying sensitive information creates its own momentum. Once a set of reports is handled under security protocols, the system tends to perpetuate itself. Finally, human institutions are imperfect. Fear, inertia, and a desire to control narratives can all conspire to keep information close. These are not necessarily conspiratorial motives. They are often bureaucratic and prudential, albeit sometimes misguided in their social consequences. There is a gentler way to look at the question. Suppose that non-human intelligences are here, and that their presence is subtle. They might prefer observation to overt interaction, study to intervention, and a posture of restraint. Many natural ambassadors observe before being recognized, and intelligence, human or otherwise, often values subtlety. If that were the case, the visible evidence might be sparse and ambiguous, consisting more of patterns than of dramatic displays. Detecting such patterns would require patient interdisciplinary work. Long-term sensor networks, sociological studies of consistent witness reports, and careful archival research. For listeners who find the subject unsettling, there are practical steps that bring calm. Encourage scientific openness where possible. Fund independent labs to test materials. create protected channels for witnesses to report experiences without stigma, and strengthen oversight so that any sensitive material is evaluated by trusted committees representing both security and public accountability. These are the sorts of civic measures that channel curiosity into responsible inquiry, balancing the human need to know with practical safeguards. As we bring this chapter to a close, imagine a soft scene: a person on a rural porch, cup warming in hand, gazing up at a sky freckled with stars. They feel a mixture of curiosity, tenderness, and humility. There is no immediate answer in that view, only a steady invitation to keep asking, to test gently, to care for one another's stories, and to prefer evidence framed by compassion. Whether there is an alien presence quietly watching us, or we are alone beneath a vast indifferent sky, the appropriate response is the same: patient study, humane listening, and an insistence on rigorous, transparent methods that bring truth into the light without harming those who seek it.